Welcome to the Wokest Warren, where we have the Wokest Discourse. In this video, I am going to talk about a speech that Georgy Dimitrov made in 1935 called The Fascist Offensive and the Tasks of the Communist International in the Struggle of the Working Class Against Fascism. This is a very important speech because it announced to the Communist International a new strategy to fight fascism, new in 1935. And in the interests of fighting fascism, I'm just going back and looking at strategies that were tried in Europe in the 20th century, and hopefully being able to evaluate them or use them to evaluate what could be effective now. So I'm very much in the beginning of this self-study. It's actually Derek Varnes from Varn Vlog. He posted it to his Patreon for anybody who wanted to study the United Front. It's a 8-week course with lots of readings in it, and the reading that I did this week goes to week 2 of the course. So I took some notes, and I'm just gonna go through what he says in the speech, but also what it makes me think of. I recommend that you read the speech for yourself. I'm not an expert on this by any means, and there's been a lot written about this speech. So read it for yourself. This is purely for your amusement. Okay, so in the beginning of this speech, he says, the imperialist circles are trying to shift the whole burden of the crisis onto the shoulders of the working people. That is why they need fascism. So what he's talking about is he's talking about an economic crisis. And that connects to our current moment. So in our current moment, we are in an economic crisis. We're in a crisis of capitalism. And rich people are not making as much money as they want to be making. So they're like, how can we extract more profits from the working class? This is different from other periods in our lifetime where wealth was just created in a way that wasn't noticeable to the working class, in the 90s with the dot-com boom and all that. As a working class person, I didn't notice a significant decrease in my standard of living. But now, with especially with a big beautiful bill, especially with the cuts in federal funding towards safety net programs, the wealth accumulation of the ruling classes is definitely cutting into the quality of life of working class people, including things like infant mortality rates and life expectancy. This can be measured. This is real. This is not maybe working class people are having a hard time. It's compared to previous decades, working class people in America are not doing well. Okay, I'm going to read this quote from the speech. This victory, on one hand, bears witness to the weakness of the proletariat, disorganized and paralyzed by the disruptive social democratic policy of class collaboration with the bourgeoisie. and on the other expresses the weakness of the bourgeoisie itself, afraid of the realization of a united struggle of the working class, afraid of revolution, and no longer in a position to maintain its dictatorship over the masses by the old methods of bourgeois democracy and parliamentarism. So what they're saying is, like, in the past, the ruling class has been able to use things like our government, our liberal government, and our Constitution as a way to maintain control and extract profits. They set up the Constitution, right? Like the proto-capitalists, the plantation owners set up the United States of America. They wrote the Constitution. It was designed for them, okay? And we are now reaching a crisis where that very Constitution they are seeing as an impediment to their wealth creation. So things like your civil liberties, your right to due process, your right to vote, all of these things, they feel that they cannot maintain their profits if the bourgeois democracy continues. So that's why you see things like the SAVE Act and like all this voter suppression. They know that things like, for example, I'm just going to take an example, Medicare for all, okay? Americans want universal health care. Like 80% of Americans want universal health care. Every other country has universal health care. But if we have universal health care, that's going to cut into healthcare profits. And the healthcare industry is very profitable in the United States. And there are individuals and corporations who make a massive amount of money off of healthcare in the United States. So they cannot allow something like Medicare for all to happen because that will cut into their profits. So that's why they have to control the democratic process and suppress the democratic process. That's just an example I'm using. Like, you could put this with everything else, like foreign policy, banking, whatever. It's like the system, the liberal democracy that they set up to serve them is no longer serving them. When he's defining what fascism is, Dimitrov says, quote, a substitution of one state form of class domination of the bourgeois democracy, by another form, open terrorist dictatorship. Before the establishment of a fascist dictatorship, bourgeois governments usually pass through a number of preliminary stages and adopt a number of reactionary measures which directly facilitate the accession to power of fascism. So we can think of some examples of how that's happening right now. So ICE, I see ICE as part of the preliminary stage. And what really was a signifier to me was the brutal repression and criminal prosecution of Stop Cop City activists from Atlanta. In murder, there was one activist who was just openly murdered. So it's like we're seeing this wave of police murders and now ICE murders, and then the construction of these concentration camps. These are all preliminary stages. We're seeing it happen in front of our own eyes. Fascism is able to attract the masses because it demagogically appeals to their most urgent needs and demands. So I have talked about this before with white supremacy in America. Fascism offers white people in America white privilege. So what it says is like, okay, if you go along with this, you won't be the ones who will be slaves. You will be the overseers. And they're offering white people a payoff to go along with the fascism. And those people that are taking those ICE jobs are doing it for the money. They need the money. And like, it's not even that much money. Like, what do those jobs pay? Like $30,000 a year? Like, how desperate do you have to be for money to take a job with ICE? You know, they say that a lot of these people have like criminal records, and, you know, it's probably difficult for them to get jobs doing anything else that would pay that same amount of money. Okay, so this part is called, what does fascist victory bring to the masses? Is the victory of fascism inevitable? Fascism was able to come to power primarily because the working class proved to be split, politically and organizationally disarmed in face of the onslaught of the bourgeoisie. And the communist parties were not strong enough to rouse the masses and lead them into a decisive struggle against fascism. Was the victory of fascism inevitable in Germany? No, the German working class could have prevented it. But in order to do so, it should have achieved a united anti-fascist front and forced the social democratic leaders to discontinue their campaign against the communists and to accept the repeated proposals of the Communist Party for united actions against fascism. So the question is, like, is that going to happen in the United States? Like, I don't think so. I do not think, okay, so like later on in the speech, Dimitrov specifically says that the path in the United States is through a third party. Now, in 2026, do I think that that's possible? No. It might be in 2027, I don't know. But like right now, third party, especially in Ohio, is not possible. We are stuck with the Republicans and the Democrats. Are the Democrats going to side with the working class against fascism? I don't believe that. I don't believe that because I don't see them doing it right now. I mean, there are a few Democrats who are fighting fascism. Notably, Alyssa Slotkin and her caucus. But the Democratic Party does not want to give up the bourgeoisie. That's how they fund themselves. The Democratic Party funds themselves from money from incredibly wealthy people. In the past, Like, you know, the strategy that the Clintons had, the third way, was just like, well, the working class people are going to have to vote Democratic because who are they going to vote for? And they abandoned the working class. So the United Front needs to be built outside of the Democratic Party. It doesn't mean that people who are Democrats cannot be a part of it. In fact, they should be included in it. But the Democratic Party apparatus itself is class collaborationist and should, like, nowhere come into making decisions in our organizations. And that is my big problem with organizations like Indivisible. Like, your class collaborators, what does that mean? It's like they took millions of dollars from this Walmart lady. Or, you know, it was back when Bernie Sanders and AOC had that tour going around that was called Fight Oligarchy. And people were talking about oligarchy all the time. Well, that's when this Walmart lady came in and was like, no, we're going to change the slogan to no kings. We're going to say no kings. And ever since the first No Kings rally, like, you have not heard Fight Oligarchy anymore. Because the ruling class has to neuter the people's resistance. Okay, part 2. United Front of the Working Class Against Fascism. Also, Dimitrov says it's important to include people from oppressed colonies and semi-colonies in the working front, or the United Front. So the working class in the United States is not limited to just the working class in the United States. Like, we can form coalitions with the working class in other countries. And in fact, that is what we need to do in order to fight fascism. Unity of action directed against fascism, against the offense of offense of capital, against the threat of war, against the class enemy. So, I'm going to pause here for a second. Okay, so here's some of Dimitrov's explicit advice. We must point out to the masses what they must do today to defend themselves against capitalist spoliation and fascist barbarity. Number 1, blame the rich and shift the consequences onto them. So, in other words, demand that, like, we are not the ones that are paying the consequences of this. Like, for example, gas just went up $1 a fucking gallon. Who is paying for that? The masses of American working people that have to drive their cars to work? The masses of American people who have to buy food that is delivered by a truck? We have to shift that burden back onto the ruling class. We have to demand that the government do something about these prices. Second, gains and rights of the working people defended against the erosion of bourgeois democratic civil liberties. Okay, so this is very important. I personally, in my personal system, I don't believe in rights, like natural rights that the Constitution talks about. However, that is a battleground for working class people to maintain power. We have to fight for First Amendment rights, Fourth Amendment rights, Second Amendment rights. Like, we have to fight for our civil liberties, because that is something that the ruling class can use to crush us, strip us of our civil liberties, and they crush us. So that is a battleground of fighting fascism. Third, joint struggle against the approaching danger of an imperialist war. So, everybody who wants to be fighting fascism needs to pivot to fighting this war with Iran. That needs to be at the top of all of our speeches. That needs to be present on all of our lips. We have to have an anti-war message. We need to mobilize against the war in order to fight fascism. And I know that's going to be hard for a lot of Americans, because, you know, there's just like, that's just like how it is a constant war of imperialism going on. But it's directly linked to fascism, and we have to fight imperialism if we're going to stop the fascism. So that means we have to fight the war. We must tirelessly prepare the working classes for a rapid change in forms and methods of struggle when there is a change in the situation. And that's something that I can say that I have seen people in Minneapolis do quite flexibly. The working class anti-fascists who are organized are nimbly changing their tactics to match ICE and, you know, match the fascist federal government. And that's going to continue to be necessary. We have to stay adaptable. One of the strategies that Dimitrov talks about of like once fascism gets going, which I believe that we are at that stage in the United States, is he says that there is a need for people to infiltrate fascist organizations and sabotage them. And like, I'm too big of a bitch to do that. Like, there's absolutely no possible way that I could infiltrate a fascist organization, because like the second some asshole said something to me, it would be on. But you know, like, it's an incredibly effective tactic, just joining these fucking organizations. And I suggest to anybody who can handle it that, like, if you can join the Republican Party and go to those meetings, like, that if you can handle that, if you have the skills to do that and the temperament to do that, that is not a bad use of your time. Like, infiltrating the enemy, that is not a bad use of your time at all. I think that we need to have anti-fascists going to Republican Party meetings, at Republican Party planning sessions, at Republican Party strategy sessions. Like, we need to be there because we need to be sabotaging them. Back to the speech. Okay, here is a part that I took notes on. Comrades, we demand an entirely different policy from a united front government. We demand that it should carry out definite and fundamental revolutionary demands required by the situation. For example, control of production, control of the banks, disbanding the police, and its replacement by an armed workers' militia, etc. 15 years ago, Lenin called upon us to focus our attention on searching out forms of transition or approach to the proletariat revolution. It may be that in a number of countries, the United Front government will prove to be one of the most important transitional forms. So, yeah, we're nowhere close to having a United Front government. Nowhere close. So I don't even need to go into that. Many comrades did not believe that so reactionary a brand of bourgeois ideology as the ideology of fascism, which in its stupidity frequently reaches the point of lunacy, would be able to gain any mass influence. That was a serious mistake. I mean, this would be important if, like, it was like the Trump Hillary Clinton election, but I think we're all past that now. I think we all realize that it was a mistake to underestimate MAGA because they're causing us significant amounts of suffering now. I'm going to conclude this with a part 2. Thanks for listening.